5 stages of your events. This one is cool because once you realize what the cycle is for the events, there's no more overwhelm with any of it. And again, the resource is inside the portal for you. So if you are wanting to refer back to it, it's a PDF, you can print it out. It's a pie chart. There's our pie. When it comes to events, 5 stages: plan, invite, confirm, host, and follow up. Don't worry, we're going to go over all of these in more detail down the road. But I want you to really look at these phases for a minute as an overview. Over the course of the summit, we'll dive into all the ones, like I said, in detail. But for right now, seeing that there's 5 phases, I want you to look at the numbers of how they distribute. You see right here, the planning part actually makes up about 33% of the entire event. Planning is huge. You feel like you're not doing anything, but believe me when I say planning is doing. Sitting down and just mapping out what do you want things to look like is part of the deal. I want to show you, I have here 2 printouts. I know they're a little small, but you can see it, February and March. And what I mapped out is how I was going to go about summit. That's right. The planning part itself involved me putting down on a piece of paper, and I love calendars. You hear more about it when we talk about creating SOPs. But this part here lets me visualize what I want the path to look like, okay? So what do I want the path to look like? It started out with my first email saying like, hey, I created a resource of 60 plus neighborhood events. I'd be happy to share it with you, right? And then from there, I started an email series of 10 event tips. So I spread out the emails to really make sure all of that was done. All the way to, hey, if you've signed up for the summit, here's what emails you got then, right? So the planning part itself, there's Post-it notes all over my office with the entire sections, the individual sections that I've used to plan the summit. The planning itself takes time. But once you have a plan mapped out, it's time to take the action. Invitation, about 22% of the time, getting the invites out, making sure you're reaching out to people. It's still a little involved. Same with the confirmation. Now, the confirmation process, there are different styles. Again, we'll dive deeper into them in a minute. The hosting itself, and that's the part that I thought was really interesting, the hosting itself of the event, if you look at it from a time perspective, might make up 5% of your entire event plan. And that to me is crazy, just because we stress out so much about the event itself, but it's such a small portion of it, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. I have applied to speak at a couple real estate conferences this year. The amount it took me to plan and to, really go ahead and do all these things was a lot. But the speech itself might come down based on time slots to 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So it's not the event itself I should be focusing on as much. It's much more on the planning, on the writing of the speech, right? The practice of it, and then also the follow-up after the event itself. What do we do with the footage? How do we use it and leverage it? What do you promote it with? The event itself is great, but it's such a small portion. So always keep that in mind when you're doing event planning, okay? Don't get hung up on the event itself as much as about any of the other steps. And then obviously the follow-up. You've heard it here first. No, just kidding. Fortune's in the follow-up. That is something we go by.
This one started out, I used to go around and deliver pumpkins to people's houses. So it started with like my VIP people in the neighborhood, our clients, the people that were in our neighborhood group, which was like a little private Facebook group. And that was like 250 people. This was 2016. We delivered pumpkins to every single house in the neighborhood. We got this big trailer, did a whole thing. It took 6 of us, like 3 days. It was this really heavy lift, but it was awesome because you drive through the neighborhood and you see all of these pumpkins on everybody's like front driveway, basically. And it was really, really cool, but it was missing. So it was my gift. We didn't put business cards. We did nothing. We just gave a gift. And I love that too, because then like the word of mouth and people were chatting about who's this and, you know, who's doing this. We got recognized by like a local news station and kind of got a little bit of publicity for doing it.
Looked at pumpkins before. I've looked at buying mini pumpkins bulk. I looked at the wholesale opportunities, and every time I looked at it, I'm like, it's expensive. So reveal the secret. How do you get a trailer load full of pumpkins that are not going to be putting you into financial ruins?
So yeah, I connected with a local farm that was doing, not a farm, but a pumpkin patch. They've been around forever, and I just reached out and said, hey, can I buy some extra pumpkins from you for, you know, wholesale costs or whatever makes sense for you? And I need 2,000 of them. And you know, what can you do? And they cut us a deal and sorted them out for us and put them on pallets and stuff like that. So I want to say my all-in cost per pumpkin at the time was like back then. So that was when we delivered pumpkins. That's when we needed 2,000. We don't need 2,000 anymore, but it was like $2 a pumpkin. So we were into it for like, you know, $4,000 just in pumpkins.
Any success stories from the pumpkin patch that you have to share?
Oh, it's, you know, again, it's similar to the Easter egg thing. I will say that in terms of like building connection and, you know, getting the thank yous and having a chance to just talk to neighbors and stuff like that. That's the big one.
All right, this one here was pumpkins, and I want to make sure we'll get the pumpkin video. Actually, we can add it into the recording because his recap video was amazing. The pumpkin patch, you heard him say when they got 2,000 pumpkins, yes, $2 a pumpkin, that is $4,000 in pumpkins. That's a lot, right? Who would agree that that's a lot? The interesting thing is that once he changed it up and he switched the medium to having, instead of delivering it, he now has people come to a community center, a park, right? Now, I think he orders 500 pumpkins. So he cut his cost by 75% just in pumpkins by simply changing the delivery medium, which was so good in this one. So like I said, we'll make sure we'll add the pumpkin video so you can see his setup. But let's talk about this. What is it? Obviously, it's a pumpkin parade, right? It's a pumpkin patch. The pumpkin patch held during the fall. The correlation to real estate on it, there's really not a ton in terms of, hey, you know, get your house ready. But having a nicely looking home with great curb appeal, people still need to move for the fall, right? Really saying like, hey, if you're looking to sell your home in the fall, here is some amazing ways to spruce up your porch and make it look like it's out of the movies, right? Like there's so much cool stuff that you can do. There's a house in my neighborhood and they do a phenomenal job over the fall. I mean, we're talking hay ball, like the hay squares and pumpkins, and it just looks awesome by the time they're done with it. If I ever had to sell this house in the fall, I'd be totally happy to take a picture with all the decoration, right? I know, seasonal picture, but it just looks so inviting and awesome when you pull up where you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So not every time we have, an event, it's terrible on anything seasonal related. So you can still leverage the pumpkin scale, like, hey, I know you've talked about selling your house. How about, I know we always have pumpkins left over. Why don't I bring them to your house? We decorate your front porch before pictures, right? You have opportunities there. The pumpkin patch too, you can use the pumpkins as a way to say, hey, how many people are in your family? I want to make sure that every household gets a pumpkin. I want to make sure that every person in your household gets a pumpkin. Whichever you think is right, you can bring that back then to lead generation through a Google form, for example. Or you can simply tell them, hey, just email me with the number of pumpkins that you want reserved. A lot of times when I start events, I have the first RSVP being a simple, hey, just email me back. Okay. Once it goes and it grows, I oftentimes put in automation behind it, such as a Google form that just does all the heavy lifting then for me. While you're at the event for lead generation, what if people just walk their dogs and they're like, oh, what's happening here? Make sure that during the event, you have lead generation opportunities. And again, we'll have an entire training for you guys on the before, during, and after for lead generation with events. Just because sometimes you have people walk up that didn't, register, you didn't account for them, but you still want to make sure that you can capture them somehow. As far as marketing channels go, they do a lot of flyers, they do postcards, really making sure you're sticking hyper local. They also have a community Facebook group. You can use Nextdoor, for example, is another way to leverage that. Just keep in mind that you want to restrict some of that posting on Nextdoor, for example, to that neighborhood you're going to be in. Instead of reaching the next 15 neighborhoods around, that's going to be a lot, right? You want to really be specific. And sometimes being specific comes also down to your wording. Attention, subdivision name, residence, right? You have opportunities to become hyper local in these places as well, as long as you're being intentional. Where is it hosted? Now, if you want to put up the pumpkins in front of your house to start with, go ahead. I've had events that started out in front of my very own house because year one typically is not super large. So you have opportunity to just work out all the kinks, try out a lot of different things. Once it grows, you can always see, hey, can we have it delivered to a local field? There's a ton of fields everywhere, right? One of the things that Jeff does with his team is they oftentimes have soccer practice, right? Somebody has soccer practice. So the pumpkins that he didn't get rid of, rather than loading them all back up and trying to figure out what do I do with it, he goes ahead and he just asks the people that are playing soccer at the field, like, hey, we've just had this event. Do you want some pumpkins? And so far, he's always got rid of them. Other opportunities, obviously, load them up and bring them to your past clients that weren't able to make it. You can continue to leverage all of this. Who's involved with the pumpkins? You're going to see it in the video, so I'm sorry I'm spoiling the surprise here, but one of the things that he does is he actually brings in, not mascot, what do you call them? Characters. He brings in characters. And I think part of the huge hit, and you see it in the video, he's had the Hocus Pocus sisters there last time, which I thought was genius, right? It's an all-time classic for everybody. I was a Hocus Pocus 1 generation. My son is now a Hocus Pocus 2 generation. Like, they loved Hocus Pocus 2. So if you really, come up with cool creative ways, you can get sponsors, you can get characters, you can get face painters, balloon artists, you can get so many other things involved. As long as these people also understand this is a business opportunity for you, after you volunteer 2 hours of your time, you can walk away with an entire list of people that have kids and that could really use a balloon artist at the next birthday party. So building up another business is a great way to get these events growing and growing and growing. So when it comes to the neighborhood events with the pumpkins, what do we have? Obviously the pumpkins, right? Those are going to be your most expensive ones. Pumpkins are an expensive event. You're going to hear a couple other ones today, and there's going to be a lot more affordable event ideas in there. Pumpkins are just expensive. Now, if you can grow your own pumpkin patch, right? Maybe that might be solving your problem. But pumpkins are the #1 expense item on your list with that one. So just keep that in mind. So definitely something we encourage vendor partners on it. And then again, remember, if you sell out of pumpkins, that's a great thing. Like his 500 pumpkins now, it's about $1,000 he spends on pumpkins. Okay, that's $1,000 event. Considering how much money we are making with the sale of a home, not just one opportunity you can get from this, but also remember brand awareness, becoming a household name. We talked about the trust factor, right? He's bringing awareness, and that part alone can lead to a ton of business.